Readings of Almighty God's Words. Exposing Antichrists. Item 10. They despise the truth, brazenly flout principles, and ignore the arrangements of God's house. Part 5. B. Antichrists disclaim God's words when they do not accord with their notions. The second manifestation is that Antichrists disclaim God's words when they do not accord with their notions. In God's work, from the beginning up until now, God has spoken many words. The scope of these words is broad, and their content is rich, including aspects related to people's intentions and viewpoints, as well as their serving of God. Of course, there is even more related to people's corrupt dispositions, and an even larger part is related to God's intentions and God's requirements for humankind. Among these words, God has adopted a variety of speaking methods. Within these various speaking methods, some tones of speech are relatively close to humans at first, followed by judgment and exposure of humankind, as well as conquest of humankind, and then gradually telling people various aspects of the truth. The content of these words is multifaceted, but no matter how vast, it is all what corrupt humankind needs. Apart from a small portion of the most special content, the majority of these words are spoken according to human language patterns, in a tone with wording, and using language logic that humans can all accept. In short, the styles and methods of these forms of language and speech are all common and very easy to understand. As long as one has normal thoughts and a normal mind and reason, one can understand these words of God. The implication of this is, as long as one's thoughts are normal, after reading these words, one can find the path of practice, know oneself, understand God's intentions, and find the principles of practice. As long as one has a heart and possesses normal thoughts, these words of God can help people and guide them through various difficulties in life, and can also enable people to understand their own corrupt dispositions. Most of the content in God's words is like this, but there is a portion that is spoken from the perspective of divinity, from the perspective of the Spirit. This portion of the content is very special. In the eyes of all humankind, this part of His words is very profound and difficult to understand. It seems to be a mystery, and also seems like a prophecy. In every sentence, every passage, and every chapter of speech, it is very difficult for people to discern God's meaning. It is difficult to find the context of God's words and God's requirements for man, as well as the truth principles that people are seeking. So, what part of His words are these? They are God's words to the entire universe and its appendices. This part of His words is very difficult for people to understand. Let's first put aside the matter of why God speaks this portion that is difficult for people to understand, and instead talk about which part of the topic we are to fellowship. Antichrists disclaim God's words when they do not accord with their notions. is related to the portion what I've mentioned. Regarding most of the common, easy to understand, and complex but simply expressed words that God speaks, as well as God's warnings and reminders to man, exhortations and words of comfort to man, words of exposure and judgment to man, and words of provision and guidance to man. For those who do not at all pursue the truth, those who have deified the word God and would rather believe in a vague God, they think that these words do not seem like God's words. They find them too common, too straightforward, just plain talk. They think that each chapter is too long. They don't want to read these words. They think the words lack depth and mystery and are therefore not worth reading. So these words, in their view, are not the words of God. They say this because the content, manner, and style of these words do not suit their taste. So what is their taste? They want to read profound texts, words that, no matter how people read them, remain incomprehensible, like an indecipherable tome from heaven. They want to read these. Antichrists disdain the kind of words provided by God that are spoken in a way, tone, and style that suits human tastes. They are full of notions, contempt, and ridicule toward these words. Therefore, these people do not read, look at, or listen to these common, easy-to-understand words that can provide people life. In their hearts, they are hostile, repelled, and refuse to accept these words. Why can they refuse, be repelled, and be hostile to these words? One reason is certain. They believe these words are spoken from the perspective of God in the flesh, so they consider these words to be human words. What is the concept of human words? In the view of antichrists, only the words of God, only heavenly scriptures are worthy of their reading. Only profound, unfathomable, and mysterious words deserve to be read by them. These common and easily understood human texts do not deserve to be read by them, cannot catch their perceptive eye, and they disdain them. They don't read these words at all, let alone accept the truth within them. Look around and see who doesn't read God's words, who stands up and leaves when someone is fellowshipping on God's words, who, upon hearing God's words being read or the truth being fellowshipped, yawns, stretches, fidgets, gets impatient, and looks for excuses to leave or makes interruptions, changing the subject to something else. Such people are in danger. You can talk about theology, any fallacies, or any human viewpoints, and they will sit through it. But the moment you start preaching, pray reading, or fellowshipping about God's words, or exalting God's words, they immediately change, revealing an abnormal demeanor, a demonic demeanor. When they hear God's words being read, they become restless and annoyed, and the moment they hear someone fellowshipping on the truth, they become confrontational and get up and walk away. What is the nature of this? What disposition is this? This is how antichrists are. Some might say, how can you label them as antichrists? Maybe they are new believers who haven't developed an interest in God's words or tasted the sweetness of God's words. Don't you allow for the possibility that new believers might be small in stature? If they are new believers, small in stature, and uninterested in God's words, then why aren't they repulsed when you talk about other things? If you discuss great disasters, the future of humankind, mysteries, or the book of Revelation, see if they can sit still. They behave differently then. From the perspective of Antichrist's nature essence, they are hostile to the truth. How does this nature essence of hostility toward the truth reveal itself? It is that upon hearing God's words, they feel repulsed, drowsy, and reveal various expressions of disdain, impatience, and unwillingness to listen. Their demonic demeanor is thus revealed. Outwardly, it seems they are doing their duty, and they acknowledge themselves as followers of God. So why do they become unruly when the truth is fellowshipped, when God's words are fellowshipped? Why can't they sit still then? It's as if God's words carry a sword. Did God's words pierce them? Did God's words condemn them? No. Most of these words are for the nourishment of people, and upon hearing them, people are able to awaken, find a way to live, and be revived to live with human likeness. So why do some people react abnormally upon hearing these words? This is the devil revealing its true demeanor. They don't feel repulsed when you talk about theology, heresies, fallacies, or the book of Revelation. Even if you talk about being guileless, being a people pleaser, or tell heroic stories, they don't feel repulsed. But the moment they hear God's words being read, they feel repulsed, stand up, and want to leave. If you exhort them to listen properly, they become confrontational, and they glare at you with anger. Why can't such people take in God's words? They can't sit still when they hear God's words. What's going on here? This proves that their spirit within is abnormal. It is a spirit that is averse to the truth and is antagonistic to God. As soon as they hear God's words, they become agitated inside, and the demon within them stirs, making them unable to sit still. This is the essence of an Antichrist. So, from the outside, Antichrists despise the words of God that do not accord with their notions. But what does this "not according with their notions" actually refer to? It clearly indicates that they condemn these words. They do not acknowledge them as coming from God, and do not acknowledge them as the truth, or as the way of life that saves people. Not according with their notions is merely an excuse, a surface-level phenomenon. What does it mean to not accord with their notions? Does every single person have no notions about all these words spoken by God? Can everyone accept them as God's words, as the truth? No. Every person, to a greater or lesser extent, at some level, has some thoughts, notions, or viewpoints that conflict or contradict God's words. However, most people have normal rationality, and this rationality can help them overcome the attitude that crops up when they are confronted with God's words that do not accord with their notions. Their rationality tells them, even if it doesn't accord with my notions, these are still God's words. Even if it doesn't accord with my notions, I am reluctant to listen. I feel it's incorrect, and I feel it conflicts with my thoughts. These words are still the truth. I will slowly accept them, and one day, when I recognize all of this, I will let go of my notions. Their rationality tells them to first set aside their own notions. Their notions are not the truth and cannot replace God's words. Their rationality tells them to accept God's words with an attitude of submission and honesty, instead of contradicting God's words with their own notions and viewpoints. Thus, when they hear God's words, they can accept those that accord with their notions and sit down to listen quietly. For those that don't accord with their notions, they are also seeking solutions, striving to set aside their own notions and become compatible with God. This is the normal behavior of most rational people. However, the not according with their notions mentioned by antichrists is not the same as it is with ordinary people. In the antichrist's case, it has serious issues. It is something completely opposite to God's actions, words, essence, and disposition, something that belongs to a satanic disposition essence. In their case, it is condemnation, blasphemy, and mockery of God's words. They believe that this common and easily understandable human language spoken by God is not the truth and cannot achieve the effect of saving people. This is the precise meaning of what antichrists mean by not according with their notions. So what is its essence? In reality, it is the condemnation, denial, and blasphemy of God. Antichrists believe that when God stands in the perspective of humanity, a third-party perspective, using human language patterns, structure, and diction to speak to people, these words are not profound enough, not qualified to be defined as God's words, so they would rather die than accept them. Some people say, "You say they don't accept, but they also eat and drink God's words. Sometimes they have spiritual devotions, and sometimes when they fellowship with us, they even quote God's words." How would you explain that? That is a different matter. That's just the surface. But essentially, antichrists define God's words like this: the words spoken by the incarnated Son of Man do not equate to the truth, much less God's words. So I don't need to accept, eat, drink, or submit to them. However, regarding the part expressed by the flesh in which God is incarnate from the perspective of the Spirit, from the perspective of divinity, God's words to the entire universe, this is something antichrists can see but cannot reach. It's a part of God's words they are very passionate about. What does this passion refer to? It refers to the antichrists drooling over these words, thinking, "It's precisely because of this part of your speech that you, an insignificant, unremarkable person, someone who is nothing in our eyes, have become God. It's so unfair. There's no justice. However, there's one aspect they find worth celebrating. It is precisely because of the expression of this part of God's words that their desire and ambition to admire and revere the God in heaven are satisfied. It opens up a new horizon for them, and they say, "Wonderful, God is indeed God." This God is the one from the third heaven, the greatest of all. He is worthy of being God indeed. Speaking such words is no simple feat. Not a single sentence can be understood by humans. These words are too profound, even more so than the prophecies of prophets. Every time antichrists read these words, their hearts are filled with envy and jealousy, filled with admiration for the God in heaven. Every time they read these words, they feel they are the ones who love God the most. Every time they read these words, they feel they are the closest to God. These words satisfy their curiosity about God to the greatest extent. Although in this part of God's speech, they can't understand at all what God's intentions are, the context of each of God's spoken sentences, what the ultimate effect is meant to be, or the meaning expressed between the lines, they still look forward to this part of His words with great anticipation. Why? Because this part is difficult to understand. It doesn't have the sense of humanity seen in the incarnate God. It's not spoken from the perspective of humanity or from that of a third party. In this part, they see God's greatness, His unfathomability, and also perceive Him as something they can see but cannot reach. The more it is so, the more they believe that the God in heaven exists, and that the God on earth is too insignificant, that He is hard to believe in, and not worthy of belief. It's not an exaggeration to say that some people have accepted God's work in the last days because of this part of His words. Some have come to God's work in the last days specifically for these words, and some are here just waiting for the fulfillment of this part of His words. Furthermore, through these words, some have confirmed the existence of God in heaven, and thus despise even more the humbleness and insignificance of the God on earth. The more they read this part of His words, the more they feel that the God on earth, the incarnate God, speaks too shallowly. They say, "Your words are too easy to understand. Why don't you say something that we can't understand? Why don't you speak about some mysteries? Why not speak the language of the third heaven? Why not speak in divine language? Let us broaden our horizons and expand our minds. If you spoke and acted like that, wouldn't our faith be greater? Wouldn't we stop resisting you? If you spoke and led us in that way, wouldn't your status be higher? How could we then despise you? Isn't this somewhat unreasonable? It's utterly irrational. Do people who are impervious to reason have normal humanity? Do they have the thinking of normal humanity?
No.
So, do these types of antichrists, this group of people who react this way to God's words, possess normal rationality? Sometimes when I come across people chatting, I join in to talk with them. But to my surprise, they discuss such lofty topics that I can't interject or join the conversation. They say, "It's obvious you're not cut out for this. You can't speak the language of the third heaven." We're speaking the language of the third heaven, which ordinary people can't understand. So what if you're God? You still can't understand, so we don't have to let you join. Tell me, what should I do in such situations? People should learn to be sensible. When I see them speaking such high and mighty language of the third heaven, and I can't reach that level, then I should just leave rather than make a fool of myself. Some antichrists openly preach these heresies, fallacies, and emptily impractical words, which clearly originate from Satan, from the archangel. The words they speak sound sophisticated and high level, beyond the reach of most normal people. What does it mean to be beyond reach? It means as soon as you hear it, you recognize it as devilish talk and that you should reject them. What is the essence of antichrists disclaiming the words of God that do not accord with their notions? Have you clearly seen it? They don't even really read these words of God. Initially, out of curiosity, they skim through God's words superficially. After a quick look, they think, most of these words are not worth reading. There's nothing practical, valuable, or substantial, nothing worthy of in-depth research. As they read on, they come across the part, God's words to the entire universe. They feel that this part has the flavor of divine language, with elevation and depth, worthy of human exploration and research. This suits their taste. What are they looking forward to now? Who can explain this part? What exactly is God's intention? What does each passage of God's words mean, and how will it be fulfilled? This is what antichrists most want to figure out, but they can't understand it themselves. Do you think they should be told?
There's no need.
Why not? Do devils deserve to hear God's words? Do they deserve to know God's mysteries? God's mysteries are revealed to those who believe, follow, and submit to Him, and are hidden from devils and Satan. They are unworthy. Therefore, if one day God decides to disclose the mysteries and the essence of this part of His words, as well as the roots and context of these words, it will be disclosed to God's chosen people, letting them know, but never to Satan or devils. If you are pursuers of the truth and are fortunate enough to remain until the end, you will have the opportunity to understand the content of this part of His words. There are many mysteries in God's words and also in His work. For instance, God's present incarnation, although more or less, and to greater and lesser extents, there are some not so obvious prophecies regarding it in the Bible and in previous predictions. All of these prophecies are quite secretive. God's present incarnation, in the whole of humankind and throughout the entire 6,000-year management plan, is the greatest mystery and the most secretive matter. Humans don't know, angels don't know, all of God's creations don't know. Even Satan, the most capable, doesn't know about this matter. Why doesn't it know? If God wanted to tell it, wouldn't it be too easy for it to know? So why doesn't it know? One thing is certain: God does not want it to know. Even if there are many signs, many prophecies, and many facts pointing to this event, indicating and foretelling its occurrence, as long as God does not wish it to know, Satan will never know. This is a fact. God will tell it directly when he wants it to know. If God does not tell it and doesn't speak of it, even if these facts and prophetic things appear, God can blind it, and it won't be able to know it. Is Satan's capability great? Looking at it this way, it's not. When it comes to such a significant act as God's incarnation, whether in the human world, the material world, or the spiritual realm, wouldn't there be some signs of it? If all these signs were looked at collectively, it would be easy to see this act that God intended to carry out. So why doesn't Satan know about it? Why, after so many years of God working in the nation of the great red dragon, doesn't it understand the importance of this act which God has carried out? By the time it realizes this act has already been accomplished, Satan can't interfere with it, and the results and fruits of this act have already been set. By then, isn't it a bit too late for Satan to discover the truth? Doesn't this fulfill the saying, Satan will always be a defeated foe in God's hands? That's exactly the case. Antichrists mistakenly believe that as long as God's words do not accord with human notions or tastes, they can disclaim them, and then God ceases to be God. They think God's incarnation cannot achieve anything significant, nor can it become a fact. Isn't this a grave mistake? They have miscalculated and fallen into their own trap. Why have they fallen into their own trap? The way God speaks and works to save people is precisely by using these inconspicuous words that don't accord with human notions or seem grand. It is precisely the implicit content of these unassuming words that contains God's intentions, the truth, the way, and life. These words are sufficient to save this corrupt humankind and accomplish God's management plan. Meanwhile, those who condemn these ordinary words will be eliminated, condemned, and ultimately punished. They mistakenly think, I won't accept these words of yours. I don't value them. Your words don't accord with my notions. They don't align with my notions, viewpoints, or way of thinking. So I can reject them. I can resist and condemn them. And then you won't accomplish anything. They are wrong. Antichrists not accepting these words of God is them falling into their own trap. God never intended for them to accept. And why is that? Because they belong to Satan, to devils. God never planned to save them or change them. That's the fact. So, what is the ultimate fact? Antichrists, by disclaiming, condemning, and rejecting God's words, are condemned and spurned by God. What should you understand from this? God's words, not according with human notions and imaginings, is not a reason for you not to accept them. God's words, having parts that don't accord with your notions, doesn't mean they aren't the truth, and that's not a reason for you to deny them. On the contrary, the more God's words don't accord with your notions, the more you should set aside your notions to seek the truth. The more God's words don't accord with your notions, the more they represent what you don't have, what you lack, what you need to replenish, and especially what you need to seek to change and enter into. This is what you should understand.